Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got with me Benyam Hagos, who is the CFO at Form3. Benyam, welcome to the Grow CFO Show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be on.
Benyam, firstly, just to put into context what we're talking about, tell us a little bit about Form3.
So Form3 is a UK headquartered business that's been around since 2016. We do faster payments across the UK, SEPA in Europe, and are now expanding into the US in the real-time payments market. So we've done our Series C extension in September. We're continuing to grow and now moving to new markets.
So a pretty big organization for something just founded in 2016. I think when I was looking at your website, the pedigree of some of your customers is quite large. And I'm seeing big banks, MasterCard, and so on.
We target generally tier one financial institutions are the ones that we look at more often. That's because when we are looking at faster payments or into SEPA in the US, is really around volume is what we're looking for. That's really at the largest financial institutions. When we are moving into new markets, that can sometimes come along with a strategic investment where some of the banks actually want to invest and become part of the company as well. So we end up with a kind of two-tier structure. The strategic advisory board, which includes MasterCard, Visa, Barclays and Lloyds, as I've shown on our website, and Nationwide, alongside our normal board of governance, which runs the company. So we kind of have a two-tiered view of the board to make sure we can run the company effectively, but also have our clients and investors input into product initiatives.
Okay, so we've got the situation here. There's you as CFO of a pretty big but pretty new organization, already expanded since 2016 to get to a Series C. But I think there's two stories to tell here, Benyam. First of all, there's your journey to say, okay, you've been there as CFO now for nearly a year. How did you get to CFO and what was that first year like? And the second story is all about how you've expanded the finance team and how you go about international expansion. So we take the first of those, Benyam. Tell me about your journey to get to CFO at Form3 in the first place.
Yes, so I started my career at PwC. So joined us in the banking and capital markets team for 12 years. So as part of that, I was in London and spent 3 years in New York. Most of my time was really in the investment banking side of the business from an audit perspective. I did some non-audit advisory work, but predominantly in the banking audit space. Then moved on to MasterCard. So I spent 2.5 years at MasterCard as the UK controller, in which I role expanded to take over the controller responsibilities for 3 of their acquisitions globally. I did for 2.5 years and really enjoyed it, and really enjoyed working in such a large organization, understanding how you can work cross-globally and cross-functionally at MasterCard. So I enjoyed my time there, and then I went to NEOM. So NEOM is a cross-border payments company jointly headquartered out of Singapore and in San Francisco, where I joined as a Europe CFO and became CFO and COO for Europe and Middle East in the 2.5 years, 3 years that I was there. That company has continued to grow, continued to scale, now at Series E level, and we've been a unicorn for a very long, since 21. So definitely a big part of my growth. And then I had the opportunity to become the overall number one CFO at Form3, which was something I was really looking forward to doing. I really wanted to be part of a UK institution that is growing globally and build relationships that I could use for the rest of my career. And by coming that CFO of a business at this point with these backers, that was an opportunity that I had to take.
Okay, so you're CFO Europe and Middle East at NEOM, and then you've moved to the CFO at Form3. What's been the biggest change in that?
The biggest change is that you are really the one responsible for painting the overall picture of the company. You are the one to empower the CEO to give them the financial information and other information to go out to market, whether that's publicly, discussed with the board or strategic advisory board. But you are the one who is driving the company forward, supporting the CEO. And when you're looking at the entire company, even though NEOM Europe was a big part of the business of the overall company, it's different when you're leading the overall company, because you're at the coalface, which means that you're at the board meetings, you're at the investor meetings, and you're responsible for the performance of the business, good or bad. And as CFO, you have to paint the picture as quickly and as accurately as you can. And that's why things we've done, such as closing our books earlier, improving our financial reporting, is key, because it allows us to make decisions earlier. And that's a big thing that we've done in this first year.
Brilliant. So what do you think your 3 biggest challenges might have been personally in moving up to CFO?
Relationships is probably the first one. So understanding that you have to build relationships across the entire execs group. When you are kind of deputy CFO, you really have to only look up to your boss and kind of across your region. But when you're exec, you're really looking across the entire company. And so you have to be able to be a strategic partner to each of those functions. Our engineers are, we have 200 or so engineers in our function, which means in our company, which means it's a big part of the business. So I have to make sure I'm strategically enabling that side, even though that would be naturally more difficult for me than working with the 50, 60-year-old sales folks where I would be closer to revenue. So as a CFO, you are required, in my view, to work across the executive team as much as you can. And that is a big challenge rather than being in a regional role.
Yeah.
Probably the second thing was the board dynamics themselves. So you are at every board table you've been at, and I've been at board for a number of years in my other roles. The dynamics are different depending on when people came onto the board, what is their view of exit, what is their appetite. And as a CFO, your view is to be balanced on the board, give your input as the financial lead, and try and drive the conversation towards where I believe is the future of the business. And that is hard when you can have conflicting views around a board table. So the quality of the information, the timeliness of information is key. And I think that a lot of that sits with the CFO in my job. The third thing I'll say is the biggest challenge is team. So we had a very successful team for a number of years. Came as a new CFO, quite different to the old CFO in terms of working style, in terms of requirements that I asked for and what my future was as a team. And it is a challenge when a new leader comes in, as always, to bring the team with you as you continue to grow. I firmly believe that there are certain people who want to take a company from Series C towards the exit, and that takes a certain set of skills. And so to try and build that into a team that has really or still in startup phase is very difficult.
So it's interesting that all 3 things there you could put into the label of the soft skills area. Nothing there that's particularly technical. It's all to do with relationships with people, understanding dynamics, whether that's across the enterprise, across the boardroom, or the dynamics in your own team. That's a fascinating insight, Benyam. Yeah.
I think the technical is expected now. So if I think back through my interview process or conversations that I've had, nobody has asked me technical questions. It's always very much on the cultural fit. Are you fitting with what we want as a leader in our company? And the technical is expected, and that's where I have to be able to give that level of detail. And the Big Four background gives you that almost confidence that I could bring that, and a Big Four person could give you that background. And therefore, you are looking for someone who's the right cultural fit to move the company forward, which is a big challenge in a scaling organization, which is evolving itself all the time.
Yeah. So I'd like to focus in on that third big area you mentioned there, the team. You've expanded the team quite considerably, but I guess the dynamic that you're dealing with is a business that's going into new markets, expanding quickly. You said that team was central when you started. So when you're expanding in new markets, you're going international, how do you go about structuring that team? What does a good team look like?
In my view, it's to try and bring structure to the roles which are not as broad as people would normally expect. So to try and stick to, especially early on, to real functional roles so that you can evolve the hub and then you can easily take them abroad. So for example, we built an FP&A function, a finance business partner function, we invested in our tax function to try and make sure the function as itself could respond to what the central team needed in the central hub. And then having people in those roles who could expand with their own international experience into new markets and grow off from there. As a business, we are across 20 odd locations and our employee footprint is very large. And therefore, we do need to have people who can understand working across different geographies. But I need to have specialists in my areas who can bring the quality of work and the quality of reporting up through the chain to allow me to work with sophisticated investors. So therefore, when I'm hiring my team, I'm looking for people who are interested internationally but have the skills in their current function to allow us to grow. And so that's why we've had a lot of investment in the last 18 months, not last year, and we continue to do that despite whether we're changing team structure, moving people around. We are trying to get that experience into our team.
So, Benyam, company structure, are we talking about still a single company here, or is there a group?
There's a group of companies across UK. We have foreign entities in Netherlands and in the US.
So do you have people in your finance team who are located with those foreign entities?
Not currently, but what we do is we have people who own those different entities from Europe. So what they were from the UK. So what we would do is we would, at this moment, as they continue to grow, have people potentially sit in those entities, but it would be managed from the UK. And then we use outsourced providers for some of the more vanilla compliance reporting as it is. But then that's the current stage. As we now start to move out, especially to the US, we'll start looking at our first US hire in the next 6 months, who will then help us respond to tax, compliance, and finance issues across the US. At the moment, that is a big focus for us as a business.
Okay, so that's interesting. It's not business partnering with the US business that's driving you to an international recruit's compliance.
Yes, it's more the compliance. And I think the business partnering, a lot, I can start it and lead it from the exec level. We have a US CEO who I can speak to regularly and comes across here quite often, and we go to the US as well. So we can manage it that way. But the crux in somewhere like the US is having somebody on the ground who understands really the rules of the road and what we need to be compliant with. I mean, I've worked in a number of institutions before where we've tripped up by not having local presence and local knowledge. We've managed to do that so far because a lot of our revenue is still UK focused. But we are now reaching that point where we need to start to get more support in regions. We have a non-executive director based in the Netherlands, for example, who helps us with our European compliance. But I will need more than that in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely understand that. So you've taken the approach of really strengthening those three core functions that report to you. We talked about culture and those people coming from a startup culture and needing to shift that more towards an exit culture. How are you going about that culture change?
I'm trying to share the stories that I've seen in my career so far, and also try and share parts of the company's journey with the team. So be open with them as we are looking at fundraising, as we are looking at any acquisitions, as we are looking to go into new markets, to try and open the horizons to things that we're looking at across the company. I share feedback that we get to the group on investor conversations. So investor conferences I attended 4 in the last month or so, and I would do presentations back into the exec group and into the finance group from lessons that we learned from working with different investors. And I also have taken part, a couple of people from my team, to different meetings with investors who talk about trying to scale the business. So they can see when I present the business, what are the elements that I focus in on, what are the elements that the external companies focus on, and where we should be spending our time. Because our function has really moved towards seeing the internal parts of the company as the customer, and therefore working appropriately with CS, the customer success, working appropriately with R&D, and realizing that in finance, they're our customer. And if things like expenses don't go through or budgets don't reconcile, they hinder our working with our customers. And therefore, we need to be more focused on those little bits as well, because they also impact how people see finance going forward.
Yeah, and that's something that really interests me. And coming from a PwC background like yourself, you kind of see the client as that external organization that you're working for. But you never see the client as being, the person at the next desk who's receiving your timesheet, or the person who's processing your expenses, or the person you're writing that bid for. You fail often as finance, I think, to recognize that internal customer. So that move to customer services is, to think about customer services, really interesting.
I think that the PwC background has given me that view, because it's really, that's how you live. Is that if I talk to some of my team, they will say they haven't had client meetings. And I always think that's something you grow up on in PwC, that you'd go to your first walkthrough at 22, 23 and turn up at somebody's desk and do that. And that would be your first client interaction. Whereas when you're in a set up finance function, you don't always see it in that way. But if you've got people who've gone through that Big Four journey, they understand that the client is the rest of the functions. They are who we are supporting. And so if I think of my biggest client as a CEO, that I have to make sure that I work in a way that supports him as much as possible. He is my stakeholder. The rest of the stakeholders feed off him, but he's my main client. And so I have to make sure that as a function, we are supporting my main client in the things that they need to achieve, whether that's working through OKRs, that's fundraising, that's managing burn, any of those things. They all work towards managing our main client, who's the CEO.
Absolutely. So culture, very important, getting that across. How fast have you actually expanded the finance team over the last 12 months? Give me some sort of idea of how quickly you're growing.
So I think we have changed 3/4 of the team in the last year, and we have hired, the team has increased in size by about 25 to 30% in that time. So not only have we increased by 25 to 30%, we have also moved, a lot of people have moved through the team and moved out into different roles because of where we are as a business. So it's really about looking at 4 people who have been here in our finance function since when I joined.
Right. So moved on to different roles. Does that mean leaving?
Either different roles, or have left the company, or have gone to different things because they felt, in some cases they also felt, that the company was not moving in the direction that they wanted to as we started to scale. So we've had people who have left to join to start their own business, or they've left and gone to a new career, because actually then when they realized everyone wanted the company to move, that isn't aligned with what they wanted to do when they joined, which is quite normal. So apprentices who finish their agreement, that's what we look to do. So we have just really tried to upskill our function, and the feedback has been from the execs and from the board that we've done well at that in upskilling and trying to get more specialists into our roles to help grow the business going forward. We're not done yet. We're not far from done. There'll be more investment that comes into the team in the coming year as we try to move on to doing more automation and try and bring efficiency to our team. Now we're just trying to bring up to the right level, but that's the next stage for me. First, we've got people in the right feet. Now we look at our processes and try and automate and move things forward to make our jobs easier. And that's kind of the next year's plan.
It's an interesting position to be in. Now, I can say it's 2016, you've got a startup. You've got a few people in finance. They've got to be generalists. They've got to be able to turn their hand to a lot of different things. But you then talk about those 3 pillars that you've established within finance, into which you want specialists. You want specialist FP&A people. You want specialist tax people. Don't want generalists in those roles. So I can understand that level of turnover, but a lot of businesses going through that sort of expansion will end up with the wrong people still, will fail to move those people on. So how did you actually make that process happen? Was it something you consciously did to move people on, or did it kind of just happen?
I think it was very conscious. So I joined in December, but our year end is March. So that meant that our annual appraisal process was at the end of March. So that meant that when I came to the annual reviews of the team, I could give the appropriate feedback of where I thought they were, having spent 3 months with them in their current roles. So I could give feedback on whether I thought they were in the right roles, whether I thought that the company was moving in different directions to where they were expected to go. And I could actually give some clear feedback and that come through high or low ratings or however else you want to see it, to provide people that feedback of what I expected their future to be within the company, which is very difficult to do, but was needed at that time. And by doing that, with certain key individuals in our team, that we were going to give strong feedback, we were going to give development areas which we weren't used to doing, it allowed people to make the decision. Do you want to stay within an organization where the bar is rising and you have to keep up with it? Or do you want to go and move somewhere else, which is more in a early stage part of its career? And if that's for you, then that's fine. But that's what I deliberately decided to do in the first quarter of my role. And that meant that this summer, as a team, had a very difficult summer because we were hiring a lot of people and transitioning people into roles. And that meant that to try and keep the ship going whilst also putting new people into new roles, we had 3 people join a week, for example. That is very difficult to do, but we got through it. And now we have a team that is pulling together and is able to report earlier than we've ever done, on time, to the right quality. And that's testament to what they've done over the last quarter and pulling together as a group.
That is fantastic. And first of all, difficult conversations. Benyam. I can't believe that 75% of your team weren't A performers. There must have been people who were performing perfectly well, but weren't the right people for roles. That's probably the most difficult conversation to have.
I think so. And some of it would be you just don't have the experience that we need in the role. To your point around getting specialists in, that is very difficult to do because you just say, if I want an FP&A function, I need people who have had FP&A experience in other places, have been able to pull together board decks, have been able to do analysis and manage executive relationships. And if you haven't done that, and I think that's a big stretch for you, then it's not the right role for you. And that is very, very difficult to say. That's not because they are poor performing, it's because they're not the right people in the right roles.
Yeah.
And that is a very difficult story. But I think if you're honest and open with where you want the company to move, I think then it becomes clear for people that they can move on. And we are an organisation where in London, a lot of people are in London still. There are lots of roles open to people. And so therefore, if they don't feel that it's not the right place for them, they can move on. It takes a bit of time. And that's why we are at the end of that cycle, really. But that's because it took 8-9 months to do that following conversations in March. And I think that's quite good progress for us. And now the team is pulling in the right direction.
So you seem to have a really good reputation as far as the CEO and the board's concerned, and you've clearly made a big difference in the information you're giving them and the service you're giving them. Being as tough a CFO as that, Benyam, what's your reputation generally like with the people that report directly to you?
You probably have to ask them, is what I always say.
Yeah.
I think the feedback I get quite often is that I'm very clear in what I expect. And I'm very clear in what I want to deliver, but I am supportive in being able to do that. So yeah. I am a relatively young CFO. I've progressed quite quickly in my career, and I invest in development of people around me. I've had people who have followed me come with me from PwC to MasterCard to NEOM because I've developed them and pushed with them. And actually, that's a big part of what I want in our team. I want our team to be wanting to push and develop. And having had that, I always think that Big Four training of you have your annual appraisal and it's not always strengths based, it is development based, and you building out your own plan and building that plan forward is a big part of the way I work and the people around me work. And therefore, a lot of my conversations with the group are how they can continue to progress. And that's the kind of function that I want. And so even though I've now hired a lot of people, maybe they won't all stay. That's not a problem. What I'm hoping is some of them outgrow their roles and we can't keep them engaged. So they grow through the roles and we can't keep them as into the next level and therefore they move on. That's fine. I'd rather have ambitious people who deliver what they can in a period and then we can't satisfy their need than have people who want to just stay and not do more. So we definitely have that culture, and that's a wide variety of people. From I have young kids at home, and my wife works full time at Deutsche Bank. Like we do a variety of different things, and I enjoy the flexibility. So I take that as something that's given, and so I give that to my team because I appreciate that most in my work-life balance.
Yeah, as do I. I must admit that I have a bit of a saying that I do what I like, when I like, where I like, and with who I like.
Exactly.
Which sounds a bit as though, oh, Kevin, does that mean you do nothing? No, it means exactly the opposite.
And actually, sometimes, and I will say to when I do my inductions and talk to the team, I do say you will get messages from me, emails from me, sometimes odd nights of the night. That's because I would much rather sit down at 9 p.m. for 2 hours than at 5 p.m. at home until 7 and miss spending the evening with my 3 kids. I'd much rather do that. And I do that. And that may not be what everybody wants to do, but I find that much more important for me to sit down and spend the 2 hours with them then and log in later and do that. And so I've been clear with people around me.
I have the same situation with suddenly needing to be emergency support as grandpa to several small grandchildren. Like Friday afternoon, there was a crisis. Grandpa had to step in. Did mean that grandpa was doing things at 9 o'clock Friday night for Gross CFO that should have been done during the afternoon.
But I honestly think it's around the company you work for and the people you work for who understand that. Yeah. Because then you don't worry about flexibility. We all have flexibility and I'm trusted to deliver. And as long as I continue to do that, it's never going to be a problem. And so because I live in that way and the team see that I live in that way, it becomes easier for them to also understand that they will also have flexibility and they will have the opportunity to do more than their role. I'm learning all the time, and I expect them to be doing the same thing.
I think that development piece is key. Now, allow people to develop to their potential. I know I've got into trouble in the past when I've had that frank conversation. It's when I've been managing other consultants in a consultancy practice. A lot of the conversation when I open a meeting is, okay, great. Where do you want to be in 2 years' time? Come on, honest answer. Where do you want to be in 2 years' time? Well, Gav, I've never told you about this book that I'm writing. Or, oh, I don't want to be doing consulting at all. I want to be in this other field. I really fancy, I've got these comedy skills. I've been really trying to hone those. And I've been getting into trouble for trying to push people in the directions that they want to go in and not necessarily retain what the party line in the business might think of as, oh, we've got to keep our best talent. Well, no,
Well,
they're somewhere else. And as their hearts are somewhere else, you've got to work with them and work how to get the best for us and the best for them.
They will remember that. So one of my old, I was senior manager when I was a senior associate, just my partner at BDO. And I messaged him because what he did for me when I was early in my career was he sat down with me twice a week for 6 months period to walk me through complex investment banking principles because I was struggling to get there. And he came in twice a week, every time, and sat with me. He didn't need to do that. And he didn't do that. He doesn't know where I would be, but he took the time out to invest in me. And that's really, really helped me in my career. And so my aim with the group around me is not that they will stay with me forever, but that they will develop and remember this time. We're a scaling, growing organization. And if you have a bunch of finance people who believe that and want to do that as well, we're all going to grow with it as well. So that gives us all the right chance.
And do you remember those role models?
Yes, I do.
I'd frequently say to new starters in an organization, I'd point out certain individuals and I'd just simply say, watch and learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you hope that they see the good points, they develop those things themselves, and they pass them on to other people.
And I will remember the people who invested in me at certain parts of my career, and that if I have people reporting to me, I will try and do the same. You'll never know how effective you are, so you'll always try your best, and then maybe it works, it doesn't. But the aim is that you are investing in your team, because I feel as a leader, you are paid for that. You are paid to invest in your team and spend time with your team, whether that's listening to their gripes or help them developmentally. You're supposed to do that. That is part of the role. And so you have to make sure that you're available for that. It doesn't mean it has to be every day, but it doesn't mean that it's part of your role. So I am trying to do that more and more, is carve out time in my calendar with the team. So I have, for example, weeklies with my directs, bi-weeklies with the level below those, quarterly below those, and 6 monthly below those, to make sure that I know I've had the conversation, and that they know where my view is on their performance or things that they want to talk about, because they do have that option. So they can't say they never had that, because they had the meeting. Everybody had that meeting within a 6 month period, which just allows me to make sure that I'm closer to where the team are constantly.
Brilliant. So with that sheer volume of turnover, you said 75% of the people that are working for you weren't there this time last year, weren't there. With that level of change, how do you keep the kind of team belonging together?
So that has been a challenge. In the year. We are a fully remote company. That's a good way to start. So we're 100% remote. What I started with the team in March time, when I had my first real offsite with the group, was that each team would have a monthly face-to-face in the office where we went through the objectives for the quarter with each team. And then they could go for dinner and do what they want to do as a group. But that allowed them to meet once a month in the office. And at the end of the quarter, we'd have a quarterly offsite as a group. That meant that then each team worked together. Each team understood where my priorities were for that group. And at each quarterly offsite, they could present back what they've achieved and where we were focused. So we did that in April and the summer. And then in October, we had an all company offsite. So when the entire company came together in Barcelona for 3 days, and we spent 3 days going on, having talks from CEO, having some sessions as a group, but also having some downtime as a group. And that is key in an organization like ours, is to actually for people to spend some downtime together so that we could really focus on those relationships across functionally and within finance. We had some investors come in, some clients come in, and we had some time as a group to have our own functional meetings But the real point of that time for 3 days was not even that. It was because we are a fully remote company. It was for us to see people who we never really see, who are always small boxes on our screen. And we wanted to make sure that I met people across a variety of functions and spent time with, whether they're other execs or others that we don't see, just to make sure we are building that bond together as a company. Because we are at a moment, an inflection point where we're doing well in the US now. We've raised our Series C extension. We're growing as a company. That needs to be felt throughout the company. And if we are not together as a group that often, and our office presence is obviously less as a remote company, we need that. And so that investment from an executive and board in the company was really well received. And that's why I think going into this holiday period, we feel like we are in a good moment as a company, having had some new client wins and having had some time as a group to work together.
And that really must be a challenge, being a completely remote company and that level of new people. How do you see friendships and so on forming across the workforce? Is that something that's hindered by being completely remote?
I think it takes a certain person to be comfortable to reach out constantly via Zoom without having met. So you've got to be the right. And obviously, COVID has helped people feel a bit more comfortable. But joining an organization, knowing it's fully remote, but being able to build out relationships is really important. So I've hired people who've known that as a challenge. So I've had people who have gone all the way through a finance process and the interview process, and at the end said, "No, I can't imagine being in finance and being fully remote because that's not how finance work. But that's the culture of the company." So it's a certain type of person who can handle that way of working. And that means that you then also have to go out of your comfort shell. So I push my team to go to conferences, to go to, if the other functions have events, go to those events, get out of your house. You don't have to be, you're remote, but doesn't mean you have to be in your house 24/7. You need to go out and do it. I'm in the office a day a week because I meet CEO a day a week, but that doesn't mean that I won't go in more if I need to, or less if I don't need to. So I do try to make sure that I'm at the most prevalent events, whether that's internally or externally, to make sure that I feel part of the company. And I expect my team to do the same.
Yeah, but that's interesting, the recruitment process, that you're getting people at the end of the process saying, no, this remote culture is not for me. And that really does highlight the purpose of the interview. It's as much about the individual working out whether the company is the right fit for them as the company working out whether the individual is the right one to recruit.
Yes, I think we talked about that on the last time we spoke. When I was interviewing for this role, it really was a conversation between me and the chairman or the CEO or others. And it wasn't a one-way interview. I was interviewing them to make sure that I also felt that was the right place for me to go. And I think the further and further you go into your career, the more and more prevalent that is. You are expected to have a two-way interview. It's not just questions at the end. It's how are you going to add value to this business, because that's what they expect. It's to be a conversation.
And all the way through your working life in a senior role with those individuals, it's going to be a two-way conversation. So demonstrate you can do it in the interview. But one of the modules on our future CFO program that I take is the last one, module 9, your first 100 days in your first CFO role. And I tend to tell people to start that journey a long time before the first 100 days, because I've seen too often the CFO that gets the job and 6 months later they're moving on because they suddenly find it wasn't the right job. And I think there's something about when you're moving for that big job, headhunter on the phone, would you like to be put forward for this? I've got you in my shortlist already from the research I've done. Because you think, oh, great, CFO role, fantastic, bright, shiny object. Yes, of course I want to be taken forward. And you're on the train tracks at that point. And it's very easy to keep focused on, oh, I want a CFO role, I want a CFO role. Then think about, is this the right CFO role for me? Is this the place that I'm going to thrive? Is it the right culture?
Definitely. And I think coming out from my last role, where I was CFO and COO, then COO, there was a debate of, do I actually want to be a CFO? Yeah. Or do I want to go and be a COO in a company, and understanding that? And then if you are being a CFO, what research are you doing? Because you can read online, you can read Glassdoor, but do you understand really the culture of that business and also the growth elements of that business, what they're trying to do? So I spoke to people, the way I've done it is I speak to people within the organization through my network. So I then would connect with I would speak to people I would know in the industry and say, do you know somebody I can have a conversation with in the business to really understand what the business is? And that's what I've done in my last few roles, because that's, I think, the easiest way on really understanding the pulse of the company, because it changes so quickly and it's never as good as it looks like on the outside. So sometimes just getting a internal trusted view can help really crystallize that in your mind.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time. We've had a brilliant conversation. I think that's the point that we probably ought to wrap things up. Thank you for being an excellent guest on this week's CFO Show.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. Thank you.